Do you ever think about what the last decade of your life will look like? Most people, if they're exercising for their long-term health and well-being, are actually sacrificing what they'll be able to do in their last decade because they're trying to get back to how their body is feeling and functioning in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. Well, in today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, Julie and I are going to dive into this idea of exercising for your last decade. We're going to cue the intro song and we're going to dive right into this conversation. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. Now, before we get into the content today, I do want to let you know that if you are listening to this when it gets released, like the week it gets released, that is a perfect time to be listening to this, because starting this upcoming Monday, November 21st, from our Facebook page, we are going to be doing live workouts. Yes, that's right. Live workouts absolutely for free. But here's the thing. Each workout is only going to be available for 24 hours. Now, we have 8 of these planned. We're not going to be doing them over the Thanksgiving holiday, but we're going to do them leading up to and the week following, because we have a huge announcement that we are going to be making about the future of our company, the future of our business. And we will be making that announcement live from our Facebook page on Tuesday, November 22nd. So to kick this off, to get everybody excited about this giant announcement that we'll be making, we are doing live workouts starting Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on the Muscle Activation Schaumburg Facebook page. So if you don't like the Muscle Activation Schaumburg page yet, go to Facebook, give it a like. It'll be 11 a.m. Eastern on Monday, November 21st. And then we had a little bit of a scheduling snafu. So on Tuesday, November 22nd, it'll actually be taking place at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And then we will be back to that 11 a.m. Eastern Time slot. So go to Facebook, like Muscle Activation Schaumburg, and get ready for free live workouts that will be taking place right on our Facebook page. Now, for this week's episode, we're talking about this idea of exercising for your last decade. Like, this is a really, really big concept. And actually, we're really excited to be talking about this concept because one of our listeners sent it in as like this idea that he had been mulling around in his head, thinking like, okay, well, what does the last decade of my life look like? And we just thought it was a brilliant idea. And so we want to give our insights and our thoughts about this today.
That's right, Charlie. I think so many of our listeners have thought about this, and people in general. We think about what's it going to be like in that last decade. And I think a lot of us hope, especially if you're listening to this podcast, that it's full of being active and feeling independent and being capable of doing a handful of the things that we love to do. Especially, it's a time when maybe you're not working and you're just prioritizing family and travel. And we know that exercise is a giant contributor to how strong and functional your body is going to be in that last decade. And the best time to start working on exercise for this time in your life is really wherever you are right now.
Today, immediately, right now.
Right now, right? And because really our exercise is an accumulation of all the exercise that we've done in our life. Like, so many people come to see us and they're like, well, I regularly exercise. Yeah, but sometimes you're doing the stupid junk that you learned how to do in high school gym class. That doesn't count. Or it does count, but not towards that like positive contributions into your strength and function that a lot of us need for that last decade of life.
And Julie, that's such a great point, because what we see so many people doing in their 50s, in their 60s, is if they are exercising, they're exercising in a way that they're almost trying to get back to how they're feeling and functioning in their 30s or in their 40s or, in their early 50s, before they started to feel like their body was maybe going downhill a little bit. And so they're like, oh, I'm just trying to get back to that stage. And the issue with that is twofold. Number one is the things that you may be doing to try to get back to that place are actually not what you need to be doing to set yourself up to have an independent, strong, positive experience in your last decade of life. But number two is so often what we're presented with as far as options of like, oh, just start working out and you'll start feeling younger and more fit and everything like that. They're really just focused on the entertainment side of things. And so we got to take a step back and say, okay, look, if we are going to construct, exercise to make sure that in our last decade, whenever that is for us, that we are able to do all the things that we want to do in life. Well, what does that look like? And then we want to lay a plan out for you to help you do that today.
Great, Charlie. And, we have a 3-step plan that will help you build into your exercise routine of making sure that you're checking all your boxes for staying strong and functional in your last decade. So the first thing that we really need to look at is prioritizing your resistance training. And we like to see people resistance training 3 times a week at a minimum. So make sure that when you're thinking about your exercise, you can do lots of stuff that you like and lots of stuff that's fun, but at a minimum, you gotta be resistance training 3 times a week. That is a must.
Yeah, it really is a must. And the reason why is because, honestly, once you hit about your mid-30s, sometimes even sooner than that, doing resistance training less than 3 times a week is just not going to cut it from a maintenance perspective, and certainly not if you're wanting to, build muscle or build bone density or anything like that. Like, the frequency has to be there. The volume has to be there. And the other thing that has to be there is actually focusing and doing resistance training, not doing, like circuit things where you're going to do, some battling ropes, and then, you're going to do some kettlebell swings, and then you're going to throw in some deadlifts in there, and okay, hit my resistance training. And then, I'm going to go and do, some box jumps and then hop on the bike real quick. And it's like, yeah, no, that's like, resisted cardio, like we're actually talking about slow, controlled, focused resistance training with the intention of building your strength, with the intention of challenging your muscles, not with the intention of going through this predetermined choreography for the next, 45 minutes or hour or however long, the class lasts, or, trying to best your time or anything like that. We're not talking about that at all. And that is the trap that so many people fall into that ends up holding them back from living the life that they want to live in that last decade. Is what we're talking about is truly focusing on and prioritizing your resistance training a minimum of 3 times a week, especially that's a must if you are over the age of 35.
You're right, Charlie. And you led right into point number 2. And point number 2, there's going to be a lot here. So listen up and rewind if you need to re-listen to all this, because it's so important. And we just couldn't leave any of it out because it's that important. Okay, so you need to be implementing what we call the 4 building blocks of resistance training. We actually just finished an entire program that implemented the 4 building blocks of resistance training. So if you missed that program, we're going to spell it out for you now. Obviously, we want you to join us for our live workouts in less than a week. So listen here and then let's do it together, okay? So here's the first thing, is that you have to be moving with a certain speed, and that speed is going to be very slow, okay? That's number 1. So remember, this is point number 2, but there's 4 points here. You have to move really slow when you resistance train. The really important piece about resistance training is that it's a stressor on our body. And when we stress our body with exercise, our goal of applying that stress is that we get positive results from it, meaning like later on and in the moment, we have these positive adaptations. Now, a lot of people use resistance training and exercise in general as a stressor, and they don't really think about like, well, what are the positive outcomes? What are the negative outcomes? But there comes a point in your life where you really have to really focus on these positives. So these resistance training building blocks are here to keep the stressors of resistance training as positive as possible. And one of the easiest ways that everyone can implement, there's not much thought process going into this, is that you could just slow down. Like, be the slowest one in the gym. Legit, every time I go to the gym, I'm seriously the slowest one. And I tell my clients, if you can move slower, then move slower, because our bodies are naturally designed to get out of stress, get out of challenge. So we're going to always want to move faster. And what you might find when you move slower is that you might have to drop the weight a little bit. You might have to focus a little bit more. You're going to notice a lot more muscle work, which is what we want when we weight training. So make sure that you are moving slowly.
Yeah, this is a key component, and it really leads into the next part, which is to respect and utilize your full range of motion when you are doing your resistance training. A lot of times what ends up happening is people move too fast. And when people move too fast, they end up moving too far. And so if you move slow while you're doing your resistance training, you are going to be far less likely to exceed your range of motion while you are doing your resistance training. Why this is so important is because hands down, the number one reason why people get injured or feel lousy after doing their resistance training or their exercise in general is they moved too much. Like they just moved too far. They exceeded their body's tolerable range of motion at that moment during that workout. All right. And so a very easy way to provide some buffer against that is to just move slower, move slowly, because then you'll have a better ability to detect when you are reaching your personal, like, hey, this is my stopping point right now. All right. And you stay within your range of motion and you work through the range of motion that feels comfortable, but you don't exceed it. And you make sure that you're moving slowly while you're doing it. Those are kind of our first two building blocks that you need to implement.
Absolutely. And if you move slowly, they really go together. If you move slowly, it's really hard to go past your range of motion unless you start moving quickly. And it's also easy to go past your range of motion if you're not listening to your body. So things like when, your muscles tighten up, that's your normal way of your body to tell you to stop. So use those two things. Now let's move on to the third building block, which is you must move with control. Now, this is just like the other three where they kind of like all feed into each other. When you're moving slowly, you're going to move with a lot more control. It's very hard to be out of control when you're moving slowly. But it is important that we recognize that the whole reason that we go to do resistance training is to challenge our muscles. So our muscles need to be in control of the weight. This is not like a fling session where I just bounce weights up and down. No, we're here to have muscles be in control of the weights. And then the muscles are what are going to get the stressor from the exercise to later have a positive adaptation. So make sure that you're moving one slowly, two, utilizing and respecting your range of motion, and number three, you're moving with control.
Yeah, one thing I heard one of our colleagues say once that I really thought was nicely phrased is that control is a currency of progression. Control is a currency of progression. What does that mean? That means as long as you are demonstrating control with the amount of weight that you're using, you have the opportunity to then increase that weight, to progress that weight, as long as you continue to maintain control. As long as you are maintaining the control within the range of motion that you're using, you have an opportunity to increase the amount of motion that you're using as long as you're maintaining control. As long as you are maintaining control with the amount of speed that you're using, you have the opportunity to either increase or decrease the speed as long as you are maintaining control. So what do we mean by control? What does control look like? Well, I think the simplest idea of control is that at a moment's notice, if you had to stop the motion, you could stop. All right, we've used like this school zone analogy, which I think is a really nice analogy. And it's like if you're driving through a school zone and the posted speed limit, say, is 35 miles an hour, except in the school zone, it says, 15 miles an hour. But guess what? It's 2:40 p.m. on a Wednesday and all the little kids are, running around outside excited to get out of school and go home. Are you going 35? Well, absolutely not. Are you going 15? Well, probably not, because guess what? What do little kids do? They go darting out into the road. And so you have to be able to stop at a moment's notice to make sure that, you don't hit a little kid or a parent chasing after a little kid or, a dog that got off the leash and, is chasing after somebody, whatever. You have to be able to stop at a moment's notice, right? And so that mindset of, regardless of what the speed zone is, knowing that in that situation, you need to be able to stop in the moment's notice, that mindset is the same mindset we want you to approach your resistance training with. That's the type of control that you need to be able to demonstrate. So there are some times where you may be able to use a little bit more speed, but you still need to be able to stop at a moment's notice. There may be times where you're using a little bit more range of motion. You still need to be able to stop at a moment's notice. And there may be times where you're using a little bit more weight. You're going heavier, but you still need to be able to stop at a moment's notice. That's the big thing.
You're right, Charlie. And the big thing with control is being able to stop at a moment's notice. That's how you can check yourself. Yeah, I was in control there. No matter, if I'm going ultra, 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 ultra slow or pretty slow or just slow. The other thing is making sure that you're sticking to your appropriate form. And I'm going to say form because that's what everyone knows. But let me tell you what I'm meaning by form. That is, you're moving the parts that you want to move and you're not moving the parts that you didn't want to move. Because in the end, it's all about what your body is doing, not necessarily what reps are happening or what weight's happening and whatever. So let me give you an example. If you're going to do bicep curls, you say, okay, great. I'm going to stand here. My legs are going to stay still. My hips are going to stay still. My whole body's going to stay still. And then at my elbow joint, I'm going to bend my elbow to bring my forearm closer to my humerus or my upper arm area. That's going to be my bicep curl. Once we've defined what's going to move and what's not going to move, making sure that we keep moving what's supposed to be moving and not moving what's not supposed to be moving. I think we've all been to the gym where we see someone doing total body bicep curls, right? Where they're a full body thrust, back and forth just to get the biceps up. So control is not only stopping on a moment's notice, but being able to maintain your form, which means you know which part you wanted to move and you know what parts you don't want to move and you maintain those, right? So you're going to continue to have control over the motion and control over the non-moving parts.
Now, the fourth building block of your resistance training that you need to implement is making sure that while you're doing each exercise, you maintain your mind-muscle connection. What does this mean? It means while you're doing the bicep curls that Julie was just describing, you are able to maintain your focus on squeezing your biceps. You don't let it drift towards, the weight moving up and down or, the music that you're listening to or just trying to crank out a few more reps or anything like that, okay? You maintain that mind-muscle connection, maintain that really focused squeeze for the muscles that you're trying to challenge with each exercise. And when you're able to do that, not only will you stay more connected to your body and be able to pick up on when your body says, hey, we need to change how we're doing this exercise so you don't start to feel lousy from your workouts, you will also actually get better results from your workouts. Because one of the things that will help you not only build strength, but build muscle and help you to kind of build the conditioning of your tissue is the amount of signal that goes from your brain and your spinal cord to your muscles. And one of the easiest ways to increase that signal is to focus on squeezing those muscles that you are trying to work, that you are trying to challenge with the exercises that you're doing. Okay. Not only that, but because you're going to be able to pick up on what your body's telling you more quickly, you'll be able to make those changes to your exercises to make sure your body stays feeling well. You're going to be able to recover better from your workouts because there's going to be less little detrimental things that happen all along the way during your workouts, which means because you're recovering better, you're going to feel better after your workouts, which means you get to come back to your workouts more quickly. All right. Then over the long term, this adds up to a huge boost in your consistency, in your ability to exercise on a frequent basis, and more importantly, to get the results that you're wanting to get from your workouts in terms of maintaining, increasing your muscle mass, maintaining and increasing your strength, and just feeling well overall.
So there you have it, the 4 building blocks of resistance training. So I just want to recap those really quick before we move on to step number 3. Okay, so our 4 resistance training building blocks are, number 1, you need to move slowly. Needs to be probably the slowest person in the gym. Number 2, you need to be utilizing and respecting your full range of motion. So often we see people disrespecting their full range of motion, trying to force too much motion, and that in turn actually works against them, and your body will often restrict motion because of that. Number 3 is moving with control. Not only being able to stop at a moment's notice, meaning you could stop anywhere that you are in the range, but number 2 is deciding and defining what are the moving parts and the non-moving parts, and keep and maintain those. And number 4, working on and keeping connection, the brain muscle connection while you're exercising, highlighting the muscle squeeze as you're moving. These 4 resistance training building blocks are the parameters that we have to be using when we get to step number 3. Now, sometimes when we share this type of information, people are like, oh my gosh, finally exercise is going to feel good, and finally it's going to be easy. Okay. So finally I get to stop challenging myself. Hooray. I didn't like challenging myself with exercise anyways. Wrong. That's where step number 3 comes in, where we need you to be lifting as heavy as possible in these 4 resistance training building blocks of moving slow, respecting full range of motion, moving with control, and staying connected with your muscles.
Yeah, this is where it starts to fall apart for a lot of people, because we start to lose the ambition, the desire to continue to challenge ourselves with our workouts, or we think that we're going to challenge ourselves in other ways versus lifting as heavy as we can within the 4 building blocks of resistance training. Meaning, we're going to challenge myself by trying to beat my time, or I'm going to challenge myself, by trying to keep up with the class, or things like that. And it's not that that's not beneficial, but when we're talking about exercising for your last decade, really building your strength, maintaining your muscle mass, what it comes down to is, not doing that lightweight like a whole bunch of times to a point where you just kind of feel like a little bit of fatigue. You feel some muscle burning. You're like, okay, good, I did my resistance training for today. It's lifting the weight to a point where it like really feels challenging for your muscles, not to the point of injury, not to the point where you're going to feel achy, beat up, sore. If you follow the 4 building blocks of resistance training, there's a very low likelihood that you end up feeling achy, beat up, or sore after your workouts. That's kind of the beauty of it all. But to the point where like you're really challenging your body, because that's what your body adapts to. That's the thing that's going to signal to your body, hey, these muscles that we have, we actually need to keep them. In fact, we may need to build them up a little bit more. All right. If you're doing just enough just to get, a little bit of a burn, some stuff, feeling like, okay, yeah, like I'm kind of working my muscles with this, your body's going to say, yeah, we probably have too much of this muscle tissue, because this workout that they're doing, the requirements of their life right now, well, it's still like well within their capacity. And this muscle tissue, I mean, it's pretty expensive to keep. It requires some calories. It requires, some maintenance, some upkeep. So, we're just going to get rid of some of it because, shoot, we don't need to be keeping all this. And then all of a sudden, now the exercises that used to feel easy, the weights that used to feel easy, well, now they're starting to feel really challenging. And now they're starting to feel like, oh gosh, like I'm just getting weaker. And actually, a lot of times what we say is, oh gosh, I guess I'm just getting old. And that's what we see is at some point, because we decided to stop challenging ourselves as much with our workouts, that feeling of I'm just getting old, it comes on a lot faster than we had hoped, than we had predicted, and that oftentimes it otherwise would if we had continued to challenge our strength, if we continued to challenge our body with our workouts. And so that's why step 3 of this process of, hey, lifting heavy, as heavy as you can, but maintaining the 4 building blocks of resistance training, using those parameters and going as heavy, as challenging yourself as much as you can within that, that's really what it comes down to. And that's why this 3rd step is so key.
Absolutely, Charlie. And one thing I loved that you said, you are not unable to do a task because you're getting old. You might be getting old at the same time, but you can't do the task because your life does not require that. Like, that's not a requirement of your life, except that one random one-off thing that you did, right? But if you regularly picked up heavy stuff at the gym and regularly challenged your muscles, then that once a week time when you get to pick up your grandkid that's 35, 40 pounds is not a big deal. Or that time when you're going to be traveling and you need to pick up your stuff to get it in the overhead bin. That's not a big deal because it's already built in as a requirement of your life. When it becomes an issue is when your life becomes very sedentary. And because it's easier and more comfortable to be at a rest state all the time, then those times when you do get in a work state, meaning you went to the airport and now you're lifting up your heavy bags, or you want to go to your grandkid's soccer game and now you got to climb the bleachers. Those times are going to start feeling really tough because that's not part of your daily life requirements. And it is our body, and it is normal for our body to not keep extra stuff that it's not using, especially muscle, which is a very expensive tissue for our bodies to have because of its metabolic necessities.
So if you're looking at, okay, what am I doing for my workouts? Are they, helping me to get healthier, helping me build my strength? And you're thinking, yeah, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And, by the time I get to my 80s, by the time I get to my 90s, I'm just going to be cruising right along. Like the reality is the strategy that you're implementing in a lot of ways for the last decade of your life is hope. It's like, well, hopefully what I'm doing right now is going to be the right things to get me there. And I want to tell you, like, when it comes to building for the future, when it comes to planning for the future, like hope really isn't the best of strategies. It can make us feel really good that we're doing some stuff, but when it comes down to it, hope is not the strategy that you want to implement for your long-term success, your long-term well-being, your long-term physical freedom and function, okay? Instead, focus on doing your resistance training. Prioritize doing your resistance training a minimum of 3 times a week. Really focused strategic resistance training where you're implementing the 4 building blocks of resistance training, moving slowly, respecting your range of motion, utilizing control, being able to stop when you need to, and make sure you're maintaining your form. And then make sure that you're maintaining that mind-muscle connection all throughout your workouts. And within that umbrella of the 4 building blocks of resistance training, challenging yourself as much as you can with your workouts. All right. That is the strategy that you should be implementing if you're thinking about, okay, what does the last decade of my life look like? What do I want to be able to do? Do I want to be able to pick up my great-grandkids? When they come running towards me and they're so excited to see me? Do I want to be able to pick them up in my arms and, and hug them tightly and, hold them close? Or do I want them to come, running over to me and then slow down and just, be able to hold my hand because I can't really do much more than that with them? Do I want to think about, okay, the upcoming trip that I'm so excited to take, but then also have to think about, crap, like I'm going to need help every step of the way. Like I hope there's, a flight attendant or somebody who can help me get my bag into the overhead bin, or I hope that one of those electric carts is available to get me through the airport because I don't know that I'm going to be able to make it to my gate. Or do you want to think, yes, I'm going on this trip, I'm going to be able to lift my bag, I'm going to be able to walk up to my gate with confidence, I'm going to be able to do all the stuff that I want to do on my trip? Really, which reality do you want? Because one way you might be able to get there through hoping. The other way is going to take a more solidified strategy, and that's exactly what we presented for you today. Now, if you are excited about this idea, about exercising for your last decade, if you are wanting some examples of different ways that you could go about exercising for your last decade, that's exactly what we are going to be giving to you live on our Facebook page, absolutely for free, starting Monday, November 21st at 11 a.m. Central Time. Join us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday the following week. That's right. We're doing 8 live free workouts, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on the Muscle Activation Schaumburg Facebook page, except for Tuesday is 22nd. We're bumping in an hour later. That's going to be noon Eastern Time, because right after that, we have a giant announcement that we will be making about the future of our business, the future of our company, and the direction of how we are going to continue to help you exercise for life. So join us, like Muscle Activation Schaumburg on Facebook, and join us for those workouts. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is starting to think about, okay, what does life look like as I get older, and is starting to try to figure out how exercise fits into that picture. Share this episode with them so they can hear about this strategy that they can start implementing with their workouts to give them a great chance of living the life that they want to live into their last decade. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.